In February of 1950, the People's Liberation Army of the People's Republic of China sent its 52nd Division of the 18th Army into Chinese territories of the hinterland. Their growing forces split apart and began a north-south pincer maneuver on the Kamdo region of Tibet. The Tibetan army prepared for the upcoming battle, and their first fight in Denki ended in 750 soldiers dead across both sides. This would be the start of the decades of ever-evolving conflict and oppression between Tibet and China. At this point in time, the Cold War was beginning and the Chinese Civil War was ending. China, in hopes of expanding their territory, had moved in the Republic of China territories. Their eyes were set on Shamdo, a borderland between China, Tibet, and neighboring countries. In October of 1950, PLA forces tackled the severely outnumbered Tibetan government forces and took control of Shamdo after a full surrender. After confiscating their weapons, the PLA soldiers gave the Tibetans a lecture on socialism, a small amount of money, and returned them to their homes. Ngabo Jigme, a Tibetan commander, was sent to reiterate the terms of negotiation to Tibetan representatives in Beijing. The current Dalai Lama stepped down and the 14th was enthroned ahead of plans. Eventually, after more than 4 months of negotiations, the 17-point agreement was signed by Tibet, which officially put it under the sovereignty of China. The peaceful liberation of Tibet, despite China's record, was surprisingly quite peaceful. Tibet was allowed to continue its previous political and cultural actions for quite some time, until in 1956 the People's Republic of China began pushing socialist reforms into Tibet. The Tibetan people, after hearing rumors that the Dalai Lama was planned to be kidnapped, surrounded his palace and protested against the People's Republic of China. This began a resistance to form against the People's Liberation Army as more and more people gathered. This would be the start of the Tibetan Uprising. Guerrilla warfare broke out between local warlords and the People's Liberation Army. Meanwhile, in the Tibetan capital of Lhasa, government officials were informed of the growing rebellion. They sent a delegation to cull the uprising and, in a surprising turn of events, joined the rebels. The rebellion was at full force in March of 1959. However, China was extremely powerful, and Tibet just couldn't handle it. The rebellion was crushed swiftly, but not without casualty. According to multiple accounts, upwards of 87,000 Tibetans perished. 3 major Buddhist monasteries, Sera, Ganden, and Drepung, were damaged nearly beyond repair in the Chinese onslaught. Thousands of Tibetan monks were executed, often publicly, and just as many monasteries and temples were looted or destroyed entirely. The worst of the atrocities committed by the People's Republic of China was regarding Buddhist monk Palden Gyatso. He spent 33 years in Chinese prisons and re-education camps for his participation in the rebellion. According to a U.S. Congressman, Michael Pittman, he was forced to participate in barbarous re-education classes, and he was tortured by various methods, which included being beaten with a club ridden with nails, shocked by an electric probe, which scarred his tongue and caused his teeth to fall out, whipped while being forced to pull an iron plow, and starved. He was an internationally acclaimed activist for Tibetan independence. He passed away 2 years ago, in November 2018. Now, decades after Tibet's last attempt at acquiring freedom, China still enforces their territories with the same principles they did then, those of censorship and suppression. All media that disagrees with China's political goals is silenced, and this includes many expressions of the Buddhist religion. Many political prisoners have been taken due to this censorship, and their freedom is a goal of many independent campaigns, including Free Tibet, which hopes to do what its tagline describes. Political views on Tibet tend to be as unambiguous as the hard blue dome of sky that stretches above its mountains. In Western opinion, the Tibet question is settled. Tibet should not be a part of China. Before being forcibly annexed in 1951, it was an independent country. The Chinese are cruel occupiers who are seeking to destroy the traditional culture of Tibet. The Dalai Lama, the traditional spiritual leader of Tibet, who fled to India, should be allowed to return and resume his rule over either an independent or at least a culturally autonomous Tibet. In short, in Western eyes, there is only one answer to the Tibet question: Free Tibet. This next part isn't going to be scripted. I just wanted to share this excerpt from an article by The Atlantic that I feel like really summed this up really well, so here we go. This was not the first time I'd seen somebody cry in Lhasa. 5 days earlier, I'd spent the evening in front of the Jokhang Temple, where I talked with 2 Tibetans. The first was a doctor who had done time in prison for writing an article warning Tibetans to protect their culture, and the second was a 53-year-old who described himself as a common worker. Both men were eager to speak with an American, and they had a great deal of faith in America's ability to help solve the Tibet question. That saddened me as well. I wanted to tell them that in America there are many free Tibet bumper stickers, but they sit next to license plates that often bear the names of forgotten tribes who succumbed to the same forces of expansion and modernization now threatening Tibet. And the Chinese solution to the Tibet question, throwing money at the problem, also seemed very American, but I held my peace and listened. "Look at this pillar," the worker said. He was standing next to the temple entrance, and he rested his hand on the worn red wood. If a house doesn't have pillars, or if the pillars aren't straight, what will happen? It will fall down. It's the same thing here. Our pillars are our history and our politics. If we don't have those, our society will collapse and all of it will be lost. All of our culture. It was dark and I could barely make out his face, but I could see that there were tears in his eyes. There was no more politically sensitive place in Tibet. Virtually every major protest had happened from the Jokhang, and I knew it was unwise to speak so openly here. He glanced over his shoulder and continued. "You need to tell the people of America what it's like here," he said. "You need to tell them what needs to be done." I nodded and shook his hand, but I realized I had no idea what I would recommend, or what the people of America could do. Perhaps we could build casinos.